Hello and welcome to Justice is a Process podcast. And today we are going to be doing some special coverage on the John Delee trial that's happening up in New Hampshire. It is to the jury as we speak. This weekend he's having I would imagine, a long weekend in the New Hampshire House of Corrections as he awaits jury deliberations to resume on Monday. So we're going to get into this here. The trial lasted all of last week, and we're going to listen to the closing arguments. We listened to the opening statements. But we're going to get into the closing arguments. We're going to cover what was covered in the trial. There was a lot covered in the trial. There was videotape. There was witnesses. And his defense is essentially that he acted in self-defense due to a series of events that occurred inside of a bar in New Hampshire that then led to an altercation outside of the bar, which led to him discharging his firearm and causing the death of another. So we're going to get into this here and break this down. Now, before we jump into the closing arguments, I wanted to get into what we need to be paying attention to as we're listening to the closings here, to understand exactly how the law works in New Hampshire when it comes to this act, the undeading of a person. So we've got, let's pull up the law here. All right, so this is the New Hampshire law as it applies to second degree unaliving, we'll call it, and the difference between unaliving and manslaughter. So, and this is going to be important because at the jury, this is something that the defense attorneys in the state were arguing over, and it was whether or not the jury was going to be able to consider something called provocation. And in this case, it's very important. Provocation comes into effect. Essentially, the jury has to make a determination first whether or not they believe self-defense applied. If self-defense applies, it's not guilty. They go home, case over. However, in the event that they can now come and they say, okay, self-defense does not apply, and he knowingly caused the death of another, and that the death was recklessly occurred under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to human life. Once he finds that occurred, at that point, the jury now has to consider the issue of provocation. And let's read about what that entails. It must be noted that under some circumstances, an intentional killing that would otherwise constitute second degree unaliving will instead be classified as the lesser crime of manslaughter in New Hampshire if the killing is committed while the offender is under the influence of an extreme mental or emotional disturbance caused by extreme provocation. Then the offender is guilty of manslaughter rather than second degree unaliving. For example, if a husband comes home and finds his wife in bed with her lover and the husband kills the lover in the heat of passion, the court may find that the husband acted under an emotional disturbance sufficient to classify the killing as manslaughter. The difference is life in prison or up to 30 years in prison. So it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference for this young man. Now, my opinion, having watched this trial, and I have watched this trial in its entirety, after digesting this trial from opening statements to closing arguments, I believe he will be found guilty of manslaughter. I don't see a jury of 12 in this case, and there's some out there says it's murder, it's murder, it's murder. And we're going to take a look at a video here that you can determine for yourself what you think, but you've got to look at all the circumstances that surrounded this and what we found in this case. And essentially, it starts with the defendant. Yes, it does start with him having a dispute with the individual that ended up unalived in this case. over a girl, right? Over a woman that he was going to the bar to meet. He shows up at the bar. This lady is talking to this gentleman, and the defendant decides to go up to him and essentially have words with him, essentially try to be intimidating because he's upset because he's talking to his ex-girlfriend, a woman that he was attempting that evening to try to rekindle his romance with. Essentially what we learned is words are exchanged, hands are shook. Now, and that's important because a lot of people are focused on the fact that that occurred. But at that point, everything was over with, right? So that event is essentially how they come in contact. But at that point, that event, in my opinion, is now no longer an issue. It's no longer a problem because you see on camera and you see by all witness statements that occurred in this case, they shook hands. It's over with. Here's where the provocation begins, in my opinion. And the defense made this argument. And I believe it will be hard pressed to find 12 jurors that you're not going to have at least one of them who's going to advocate for what I'm about to get into. And if that's the case, I think you're going to see the jury come to a compromise verdict of manslaughter. And I think they'll be happy with it given the circumstances that occurred. Because essentially what happens now is the ladies in question, she was with a couple of her friends. They go up to the bar to go get a drink. The victim, in this case, is sitting there with his friends, and they decide to take another stab at the girls to try to get their attention and offer to buy them a drink. It strikes up a conversation. In this conversation, okay, the victim in this case begins to start talking trash, essentially, on the defendant, saying to them, I'm a professional fighter, we're professional fighters, and we're going to basically kick his ass. We're going to beat him up. We're going to punch him in the face. And she's basically laughing and like, are you kidding me right now? This dude's like 6'6". You're 140 pounds. There's no way. He says, I'm an MMA fighter. Trust me, I can kick his ass. Well, so at this point now, she returns back to her ex-boyfriend and says, yeah, I just came from the bar and he's talking some major shit. He says he can kick your ass. To which point, now he is now provoked to go back up to him, okay? Because, of course, number one, there's alcohol involved. He's been drinking. Number two, this dude's talking some major smack on him. So he returns to the bar for a confrontation. And as a result, gets to the bar and says, hey, man, let's go outside. Let's go outside and fight. You think you can kick my ass? Let's go outside and fight. Words are exchanged. There's a physical altercation. Bouncers come over, and they break up the situation. And basically the bouncer says, dude, you're 3 times the size of this guy. Leave him alone. He says, yeah, I know. He called me a bitch. He said I wasn't tough. They go over to the other side of the bar. Now, again, things are now broken up again for the second time of the evening, right? They're broken up. He feels like, hey, I've just kind of settled it with them. He wouldn't go outside. Everything's cool, right? Well, now this guy decides, okay, I'm going to go over to a friend of mine who's over there, who wasn't there witnessing what occurred, and he tells him what happened. He tells him that this guy wanted to fight him, that this guy put hands on him. So now this guy goes over to the defendant. Now he's a friend of the guy who ends up getting shot. And he makes a beeline over for him. And you could see the video of this. The state showed the video of this in their case in chief. Makes a beeline over to the guy and punches the defendant straight in the face. Now he's wearing rings. Apparently this guy wears rings when he's out and about in case he gets in fights. At least that's what the implication was in the defense's cross-examination. Punches the guy in the face. They end up getting into a physical altercation where punches are exchanged. Now this guy's eye gets cut. The extraction team at the bar comes over, pulls these guys apart. There's an on-duty police officer who's in charge of managing the bar, and they get these guys and throw them out. Okay. Now at this point, the defendant is rightfully upset. He's just been assaulted. He was sucker punched. He's bleeding and he's screaming and he's been drinking, right? So he's upset. He's screaming, "Hey, you want to fight? You want to fight? I want to fight. Who punched me in the face?" So essentially, they get outside. Now, again, this is the provocation part. He's been now punched in the face, and this thing is reignited again. Now he goes out, and everybody should have just left. But no, what happens? The victim leaves the bar eventually. He comes out. You see him leave. He goes one direction. The other two dudes that were with him, they go to their car. One of the guys decides to come over and starts engaging with the defendant smoking or who's smoking a cigarette. And they start getting into a verbal altercation, which eventually the defendant goes and physically assaults this guy as things advance. They get into a physical skirmish, to which another guy gets out of the vehicle, comes over with pepper spray, and threatens him with pepper spray. At which point now they're trying to break everybody up. Now, when the pepper spray comes out, the defendant pulls out his gun to let them know, "You got pepper spray, I got a gun. Somebody hit me in the face. I don't know if it was you or who it was. He's talking smack. I'm not going to let nobody get the drop on me." And starts screaming, "I got a gun, get back." To which, at that point, the whole point was, get the hell out of here, right? So what do, right? The guy's got a gun out, a loaded gun. He's let them know, if anybody's going to come at me, if anybody intends to hit me or physically do me harm, I'm shooting you. You're not going to beat me up. You're not going to, you're trained fighters. He's been told these guys were trained fighters. And as a result, his friends then grab him and start moving him up the street. You see all of it on the video. Dude, what do these guys do? They see he has a gun. They take one of them takes their jacket off, and now they advance on him. They chase him up the street. And once they chase him up the street, they go and they chase him up the street and essentially converge on him. And they have a confrontation. And it ends up being that this young man who was claiming that he was going to beat him up and knock him out and hurt him, he punches the defendant in the face, who he knows is armed, with his other two friends standing right around him, coming on to the defendant, or advancing on the defendant. He punches him in the face, and the defendant pulls out his gun and then unfortunately fires 9 shots at this young man and kills him. And then the rest is history. So the issue of provocation is, was he provoked in the moment? Did he knowingly cause the death of another? Was it reckless? Yes. Did he show an indifference to the value of human life? Yes, he did. He pulled a gun out. However, was there sufficient provocation? Was there something that occurred? And yes, there was. And it was the fact that he got hit in the face. He knows another guy's got pepper spray. He's been threatened. So in his mind, at that point, he's under duress. Now, the question is, were those circumstances enough to say he was defending himself or not? And that's the issue that the jury's having to struggle with. But as you can see, these are the issues that the jury's going to be considering. Now, I want to show you, we're going to watch the video together here that was shown in court. Give me one moment. All right, so let's watch this. This is the moment of the shooting. We're going to watch it here. Let me try to get this up. All right, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and play on it.
What do we see them do in the video? They're going to turn and run this way. Okay. And Mr. Saldana, what does he do? He's going to kind of put his hand on his head and start walking back towards Hampshire Lane. Okay. All right. We'll play it one more time. These guys are awesome. Hey, get that here. Hey, Detective Lovejoy, if you can have your seat, I have no further questions, Your Honor. That's fine.
All right, so that is the video of the shooting. So for you, you can kind of decide what do you think? Do you think that was self-defense? Number one, does it rise to the level of self-defense? Two, do you think the punch in the face was sufficient provocation to say this isn't murder, this is manslaughter? So thereby, he's now punishable by up to 30 years instead of life in prison. Now, the last thing we're going to look at before we get into let's see. All right. So this. All right. So this is the definition. This is extreme emotional disturbance. So we're going to go over this right here so you can kind of understand. After watching that video, I want you to we're going to read this together, and I want you to be thinking about whether or not the jury, this is what the jury is going to be having to claim here. This is going to be enough to say the jury. Now, obviously, if the jury finds that what you saw was self-defense, then this is not even going to be considered. But once the jury eliminates the fact that self-defense was an issue, right? They say, okay, I don't believe he defended himself. Now they're going to go, okay, you are guilty of murder. Now the question at that point is, did provocation exist to downgrade the murder or unaliving, I guess I should say, from unaliving to manslaughter? So let's read this here. Extreme emotional disturbance is not a legal term in New Hampshire, but it is similar to the concept of provocation that can reduce a unaliving charge to manslaughter. So provocation is the key here. Provocation means that the person who killed another person was under the influence of a sudden and intense passion or emotion that was caused by something the victim did or said. So in my opinion, I think this if I'm back there deliberating, this case is custom made for that. He's threatened the man. He's said he was a fighter. He said he was going to beat him up. Another guy, he's been taunted. He's been threatened with pepper spray. And now he comes over, hits the guy in the face. This guy's getting hit for the second time in the evening. The passion or emotion must be so strong that it overcame the person's reason and judgment. And I do believe it was in that case. On top of that, you got alcohol involved. It made them act without thinking of the consequences. I don't think at that point, when you see that punch thrown, he's thinking of consequences. He's just thinking, this guy just hit me, boom, 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 boom. Now, being that's a semi-automatic weapon, I think you got to take into account the fact that 9 shots from a semi-automatic weapon isn't necessarily the same as something you're going to have to chamber and shoot. He just pulled the trigger. Happened to be 9 times is how many times the guy got shot. You can see how fast it happened. Provocation is not a complete defense, but rather a partial defense that can lower the penalty for homicide. To claim provocation as a defense, the person must prove 2 things. They acted in the heat of passion without any cooling off period and without any opportunity to reflect on their actions. Very important here when you watch the video we just watched. Did you see a cooling off period? When we're going to rewatch it again one more time after this we read through this. And the provocation was reasonable and adequate. And this is why you're going to hear in the closing argument, the state is going to be talking about it wasn't reasonable. It wasn't reasonable. And that he was acting out of anger and in a desire to hurt and not being provoked, meaning that it would have caused a reasonable person in the same situation to lose their self-control and act impulsively. The reasonableness and adequacy of the provocation are determined by the jury, who must consider the circumstances from the person's perspective, as well as the common sense and moral standard of the community. For example, if a person killed their spouse after finding out they were cheating, the jury must decide if that was a reasonable and adequate cause for provocation, or if the person should have been able to restrain their emotions. However, some causes are not considered reasonable or adequate by law, such as words alone, unless they are extremely insulting or abusive. Provocation is a defense that is recognized in New Hampshire as well as other states. However, the definition and application of provocation may vary from state to state, and some states have different terms for it, such as voluntary manslaughter or imperfect self-defense. Provocation is also an affirmative defense, meaning that the person who claims it has the burden of proof and must present evidence to support it. So in this case, because of the provocation aspect, it's why the defense had to put on a case, and actually the burden of proof shifted to the defense in that case of proving provocation. Provocation is a complex and controversial topic, and there are many debates about its validity, applicability, and implications. Some people argue that provocation is a way of excusing violent behavior and blaming the victim, while others argue that provocation is a way of recognizing the human frailty and compassion of the perpetrator. Some people also question the specific basis of provocation and whether it is possible to measure the degree of passion or emotion and its impact on behavior. So, with that said, again, I know it's a tough video to watch because human life is lost in this video, but it's relevant to watch because it's important for us and for the jury, because this is what the jury is going to see. This is what the jury is going to be analyzing. So as a result, we've got to look at it. And this is it. I mean, when you watch that video, looking at this definition of provocation, you have to look at it in that lens. So let's take a look here.
Mr. Mendoza, what do we see them do in the video? They're gonna turn and run this way.
And I want you to be thinking of that definition of provocation as we're watching this.
And put his hand on his head, start walking back towards Anthony.
And he is here. Now watch. It's got to be instant. There's got to be no time for him to consider. Boom, he hits him. Pop, 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 pop. Was there time? Was that a reaction? Did he have a moment to think? Or was he reacting to extreme provocation from somebody who had just threatened him, who said he was a fighter? And all the events that are occurring, on top of that, he's got alcohol invading his thought. What do you think? So with that, we're going to jump in now to the closing arguments. And let's jump in here and start listening to the closing arguments. And let's take a listen here.
All right, is the defense ready to proceed with closing? My man, Judge, please. Ladies and gentlemen.
And also, let me explain something here too. In New Hampshire, you do not have, the state does not go first with closings. So the defense goes first, and then only in cases where there's an insanity plea does the state go first, does the state go first, and then the defense goes, and then the state gets a rebuttal. The state in New Hampshire, the defense begins, and then because the state has the burden of proof, they go last, so they get an opportunity to rebut and discuss their case. So there's only two closing arguments here. But anyways, let's get into it.
First thing I want to do is thank you all for being attentive. I thank you. John thanks. It was clear that everybody paid especially close attention to some very difficult evidence. I want to thank you all for doing so. Timothy Pouliot's death is tragic, but it is not murder. Let's start again at the beginning of the evening of January 27th, 2023. Now, you heard from a number of witnesses, and you're going to see video, still images. And what I'm going to ask all of you to do, and we talked about this at the beginning of the trial, is use your common sense. It is now time for you to evaluate the evidence. I want you to pay particular attention to the things that people say, but also to the other ways in which people communicate their intentions, their body language, what they say, how they act. And when you're evaluating the images and videos and statements of everybody that you've heard from, I want you to take all of that into consideration when you evaluate the evidence of the events on the 27th and the 28th. Now, you've heard from the state's witnesses, one of whom, Olivia, a friend of Abby, somebody who knew John, testified. And what she testified was they were all coming to the GOAT that evening, and eventually John was meeting up with Abby. They were in some kind of a relationship, or they knew each other, or they had previously dated. And John walks up to the group when they're inside the GOAT. And Abby knows John, and John knows Abby. And you see the video. And there's no sound, but you can see that they're clearly familiar with each other. And John walks up at the same moment that Timothy Pouliot, Trenton Nash, and Michael Mendoza are talking to them. And you heard Olivia talk about what the vibe was with Trenton Nash, Michael Mendoza, and Timothy Pouliot. She described that it was a little creepy, or she was uncomfortable, and John walks up. And you also heard that she said that John said something like, hey, you got to leave, to Timothy, or you got to get lost. Or maybe he used a derogatory term like he's scum. But that's not all that happened at that moment. Review the video. Trenton Nash and Michael Mendoza walk off the screen, leaving Timothy there speaking to John Delee. John Delee doesn't have his hands up. John Delee isn't pushing him away. John Delee has his hands open. He's opening his body up. He doesn't feel like he's under threat. And at the end of that, back and forth, John offers Timothy Pouliot a handshake. They dap up, and Timothy walks off. And then they continue to socialize and enjoy the evening.
But then Olivia tells you something else, that when they go back up to the bar to get additional drinks, they overhear Trenton Nash, Mike Mendoza, and Timothy Pouliot talking about how they're professional fighters and that they're going to knock John out. And it's not that they just overhear this. It's not that they just overhear it. It is said in a way to communicate to those young women in that moment what their intentions are. And so Olivia told you that her and Abby walked down and they warned John, look out, those guys are coming for you. They want to knock you out. That's a warning. That's a communication. And then you see more video of John, right? We see John down there at the bottom of the ramp, continuing to have a good time. And then he walks up to the bar. And he has another confrontation with Timothy. And this time it's not so friendly, right? This time there's some harsh language, there's a shove, and a bouncer intervenes. And you heard from Brian Delaney. Now, Brian Delaney said that they were shit-talking each other. And he pulls John aside and he says to John, what are you doing? You're huge. You're huge. What are you doing shit-talking this guy? And when Brian and John part ways, when he sends John back down to the dance floor, what did Brian tell you? They kind of laughed it off. They chuckled it off. As far as John is concerned, his body language, his communication, this is over. This is over. And when Brian goes to talk to Timothy Pouliot, what does Timothy Pouliot say? I'm not worried. I'm an MMA fighter. I do MMA. And then Brian told you he knew what that meant. That's 2 times.
Now, that is important because you got to remember that someone who's an MMA fighter or a professionally trained fighter, the use of their hands is considered a deadly weapon. So the fact that he's being told this and that that's in his mind, the level of provocation when he uses his fists has to be interpreted. And I just find it hard to believe that you would settle a second degree unaliving and say, hey, we're going to send this guy away for life. The jury isn't allowed to consider sentences, but in the back of their mind, they know what they're doing when they come back with that verdict. And I just find it hard to believe. I would be hard-pressed to go forward with the totality of the circumstances, the amount of bad actors that happened. Yes, was it extreme? Well, that's why you're getting convicted of manslaughter. Because, you know, that's making it clear that you shouldn't have used the gun. The gun was too much. It went too far. But you were provoked. He was provoked. This thing went way too far. You know, obviously to me, you get a second degree unaliving if he let's say he pulls that gun out in the bar, comes over to him and just starts firing on him. That would be that situation. But the fact that the gun doesn't come out until they're outside, it doesn't come out until they pull the weapon first, makes a huge difference in this case. Now, maybe, depending on the jurors you got in there, some, again, could come and say this is self-defense. I don't think that's completely beyond the realm, but I find it hard to believe as well that you're going to find 12 people comfortable with the idea that somebody's just walking out of that courtroom free after what occurred in, what was an extreme overreaction. I think it's going to come right in the middle. I think it's going to be a lengthy deliberation because of the nature of the deliberation, because I think the self-defense issue is has to be dealt with first, and then you got to restart the deliberations on the provocation issue. So I expect this to go into Monday, if not into Tuesday. it's going to be a lengthy deliberation. And then my understanding is deliberations don't go past 4 o'clock in the state of New Hampshire, at least at this courthouse. So you could even see this thing drag into Wednesday with the nature of this case. It's one that is going to cause a lot of debate for a lot of people. It's not cut and dry. Now, maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe it'll be quick, but I don't think it will be. Anyways, let's get back to this closing argument here.
Two times that it's been communicated what's going to happen. They're going to try to knock John out. So far, it's only words. It's words. And then we see another video. And that's the video. And we start off with the picture of the dance floor. And you see Trenton Nash, Mike Mendoza in the middle of the dance floor. And they're talking to each other and they're dapping each other up and they're talking to their buddies. You see Timothy Pouliot walk down the ramp. And for a brief moment, Timothy Pouliot leans in to Mike Mendoza. And I suggest to you he whispers something in his ear. And then Mike Mendoza turns, takes 1 or 2 steps, throws a haymaker at John Delee. Then you see them both go down. Now we have Officer Smith. Now, Officer Smith testified that he's a detail officer. His job is to be the police presence. His job is to be there to keep the peace. And you have body-worn camera, first-hand, front row seat to that response. And I submit to you that at 22 seconds, you're going to learn everything you need to know about Mike Mendoza. You're going to see Mike Mendoza mouth on that camera, "I don't know," or "I have no idea." But that's for you to decide. And you're going to see Mike Mendoza's rings. And then as soon as that audio comes on, you're going to see John Delee's face, freshly cut from being ambushed by Mike Mendoza at the behest of Timothy Pouliot. And we heard from Michael Mendoza. The same Michael Mendoza that claimed to police the evening of that he didn't start anything. He didn't go after anybody, that John was the aggressor. And he did that the night of. From the moment that Mike Mendoza throws a punch and has his first interaction with a police officer, he's minimizing his involvement. He's not telling the truth. And he came in here today and told you, well, as soon as I saw the video, well, yeah, he was confronted with the truth of what he had done and what he set into motion. You hear John saying, "Who punched me? Come fight me." He got punched in the face. And you heard Mr. Mendoza say, "Well, I threw multiple punches at him." And you see Mr. Mendoza get guided out. And you see Trenton Nash follow him out. And then they just put John Delee and his friends right out on the same sidewalk. And you see Officer Smith's body-worn camera follow John out. But Officer Smith doesn't walk back out onto that street to make sure that the two combatants aren't put there together. He stops. He turns off his body-worn camera. But just before he does, you hear John say again, "Somebody sucker punched me. Did you see that?" And now John's out on the street. We have video again of John on the street. And we have video of Trenton Nash and Michael Mendoza going to that car. Now, Mike Mendoza came up to you again and said to you, Trenton Nash never got in the car. It was an ice bank, a snow bank. He couldn't even get in the car. They get in the car, both of them. And they're in the car for a little bit of time. And then Trenton Nash gets out of the car and he starts walking across the street. Now, Trenton Nash came in here and told you, I was going to go smoke a cigarette. But he crosses the street and approaches the people he just saw get into a fight in the bar. He clearly knows who John Delee is. He's been around John Delee previously in the evening. He just saw his buddy Michael get into a fight with him. And so he walks up to him. He walks up to him. And of course, John notices this. He sees somebody in a dark coat and a white hat who he probably saw before earlier in the evening. And that guy's coming towards him. At the same time, he's yelling, "Who punched me?" So he thinks that Trenton Nash is coming towards him because Trenton Nash was involved. And you see a defensive, hurt, upset, amped up John Delee reach out and shove or punch Trenton Nash. Then you see John Delee reach out and try to shake his hand. And then there's another punch. And what does Mike Mendoza do, who's sitting in his car watching all of this? He doesn't make a decision to walk away. He doesn't decide that it's none of his business or he had his shot, he got his shot in, and he already jumped John in the bar. He decides to get out and add a weapon to all of this. And he crosses the street with the pepper spray behind his back, and you can see that on the video.
Now, this is important because, again, when you're looking at the provocation issue, okay, you've got to look at the totality of the circumstances. And the fact that John Delee hasn't brandished a weapon at this point, he's not pulled it out, he's using only his hands. The weapon only gets involved when they bring the weapon in. And that's significant, whether you like it or not, whether you say pepper spray isn't as deadly as a gun, it doesn't matter. He didn't pull that out at that point. There was no gun present at all. It was all hands. It was all fighting. And John Delee was known to be a carrier. That came out in trial. His friends testified and said, yeah, he always carried a gun. So at that point, it wasn't like he had it on him and was, hey, I'm going to do it. He's carried it numerous times. Probably been in fights before, I would imagine. I don't know. That didn't come in as a relevant topic in this case. But at this point, no weapon has been brandished, shown, or brought out. No intent has been shown that he's trying to kill somebody. Nothing like that. It's only when Mike Mendoza, who's already hit him in the face. Now, he doesn't know this at this point. He doesn't know who hit him in the face. Now, you got to remember that. That's a significant fact. He was not certain who actually hit him in the face. Okay? He did not know. It could have been Timothy Pouliot, who's the victim in the case. He didn't know. He's yelling. He's screaming. All of a sudden, these people are coming on him. And remember, from his purview, he's got people coming at him from all directions. They're telling people they're going to physically assault him. This is the vantage point he has. This is the vantage point he has. He's under attack. And look, the state has tried to twist things around a little bit here because they want this to be second degree unaliving and not manslaughter. And, that's a shame because I think they've mischarged this case. I think if in this instance, because now they're leaving it for the jury, but I just believe that if you look at in fairness, you look at the totality of the circumstances, this was a situation where I believe provocation existed. Now, do I believe this should have not been charged at all? No, I think a trial is correct here to determine self-defense or not. But this is very significant stuff here, guys. Let's keep listening.
Video from the garage. He crosses the street with a weapon concealed and points it at John. Now, Mr. Mendoza, again, has consistently minimized his involvement in all of this. But you heard Officer Smith talk about what the effects of pepper spray are. It can be blinding, it can make it difficult to breathe, and it can be disabling. And if you watch the video, John notices that Michael Mendoza is standing on the snowbank with the pepper spray in his hand, pointing at him. And at this point, seeing pepper spray pointed at him, he pulls a gun out of his waistband. And he drops it because he's not expecting to have to defend himself from somebody with a weapon. But he picks it up and you see him rack the slide. Why is that important? John didn't go into the goat that night with a loaded firearm. But now he's under threat. He has two people who have approached him outside of the goat after he was jumped inside of the goat. Doesn't know who these people are. He doesn't know what their problem with him is. All he knows is that they keep coming at him. And now they have a weapon that can leave him disabled, unable to protect himself. But he doesn't point the gun at Michael Mendoza. He pulls the gun out, he loads it, and it remains at his side. And it's at this point that you've heard multiple witnesses tell you that they begin to push John up the street. That's credible and that's normal. You can watch that video for yourself and make your own decision. What's most important is John moves in that direction. And Matt Soldano told you why. That is where safety is. The car is at the Market Basket parking lot down that alleyway. They need to get out of there. Matt Soldano knows that, and that's what they tried to do. But Mike Mendoza and Trenton Nash have no interest in seeing them get to that car. Mike Mendoza's car is in the opposite direction. It's across the street from the goat. Trenton Nash's car is either 10 or 15 minutes away, or it's in the Bank of America parking lot. It depends on who you want to believe, Mike Mendoza or Trenton Nash. But they're not moving towards their car. Look at the body language of everybody in that video. Mike Mendoza is lifting a middle finger into the air and screaming at John Delee and his friends as he walks in the same direction that they do, following them up Old Granite Street. John Delee and Matt Soldano are trying to get back to their car, and these two people who have attacked John twice are following them. Where's Timothy Pouliot? There's video of Timothy leaving the goat and walking in the opposite direction for a short period of time down Old Granite Street, away from the Soho. But he stops. He turns around. He looks to see where Mike Mendoza and Trenton Nash are and where John Delee is, and he turns around and he follows. You heard from Brendan Enright. Brendan Enright doesn't know any of these people. He doesn't know John Delee. He doesn't know Timothy Pouliot. He doesn't know Mike Mendoza. He doesn't know Trenton Nash. He doesn't know Matt Soldano. He's just on the street. And what does he hear? Hey, pussy, this is New Hampshire. We all have guns. And then he turns as Timothy Pouliot walks next to him, and he warns Timothy, that guy's got a gun. You don't want any of that. But Timothy doesn't stop. Michael Mendoza yells out, "He's got a gun, he's got a gun." Nobody stops following John Delee and John Delee's friends. They keep going. Wherever you think they might have gone, or wherever they think they might have gone, it's on video. It's on video every step of the way, with the brief exception of that blind spot right outside of the Soho. They go from the goat, and in the case of Timothy Pouliot, from further down, all the way up the street to the corner of that alleyway. Nobody stops. Nobody goes back to their car. Nobody thinks better of it. As John is making his way back to his car with his friends, 3 people follow him, yelling and screaming, "He's got a gun." You saw video of Abby Elliott running up the street.
And what he's saying is absolutely, completely relevant. And that is proven out in the evidence. I mean, the fact that these guys keep advancing, this is not a situation where the defendant's pursuing this guy and then pulls his gun out and is chasing him down, gets punched in the face, and then fires on him. He's retreating, technically. He's going away from the situation. He's leaving the situation, and they're coming after him. The victim had a choice, and this is why I find it so hard to say you're going to hang a second degree on this guy, second degree unaliving, because to me, that's just, these guys were provoking him, even with the knowledge they have a gun. Let's keep listening.
To stop Timothy Pouliot. That doesn't work. Now, you're going to see video again of the Soho. We see the alleyway, and we see the area in front of that restaurant. And we see the pursuit. And you see the body language. Chandler Gage was identified on video by the detective, with Matt Soldano, who identified himself and was identified by the detective, waving at anybody who will look at them and listen. Stop, get back, stay away. And you heard Matt Soldano say that when he heard that they were being followed, when he realized that they were being followed, he told John to not go down the alleyway. Why? Because nothing good happens in a dark alleyway. This isn't about retribution. It's about the relentlessness of the 3 people that pursued John Delee up the street that evening. Michael Mendoza is armed with pepper spray and rings on his hands that he admits to having, that you can see for yourself. John knows that. He saw the pepper spray. These people intend to do him harm. It's not one person. It's not 2 people. It's 3 people. At some point, the decision is made to not go down that alleyway. He turns his back and he's in danger. He makes a choice to stay in the light, to stay where there are people. People in light means safety. That's your common sense. And so he stands where he is. And he doesn't point a gun at anybody. He doesn't threaten anybody. He stands there with his friends, hoping that this is going to calm down. But it doesn't. And you don't see John throw punches or shoves or point a weapon or do anything like that in any of those videos. And then Timothy Pouliot, the MMA fighter, and Mike Mendoza, who has already threatened John with a weapon, and Trenton Nash are now arrayed within arm's length of John Delee at the end of the street across from the alleyway. And then you heard Matt Soldano tell you that he got searched for a weapon and asked, do you have a gun? And you heard what that made Matt feel like. He knew why they were asking him that question. And he puts his hands up and he walks away. In that moment, John is alone, 3-on-1, against 3 people who have not only told him they want to harm him, who have not only communicated in very clear terms that they are capable of harming him, they have already tried twice. He's at a road. But he doesn't point his gun at anybody. He stands there, and he's staring right at Mike Mendoza. And then Timothy Pouliot throws that punch, the professional fighter, the MMA fighter. And you see John take a step back and fire 8 or 9 straight shots. It's on video. You get to see that. Now, Ayla came and told you that she heard different. She said, well, no, I saw 4 shots and then shots while Timothy was on the ground. That's not what the physical evidence shows you and tells you. You see the cell phone video, you see the bullets hitting the ground, and then you see Timothy fall backwards. And you see him twist to the left and to the right, but he never stops facing John. As soon as the threat of Timothy attacking John is gone, John stops. The police seized his firearm. You watched Officer Smith respond. He's the closest officer at all times. He's the closest in the bar. He's the closest on the street. He makes it up there in minutes. John is there. He has not run away. He has not left the scene. He has stayed. He immediately places his firearm on the ground, and the officer immediately stands over it to secure it. A detective comes and collects that firearm. They secure it. They render it safe. And you've heard testimony from the state's expert, the state's own detective, that there were 5 rounds left. John didn't start shooting and keep shooting. John shot until the threat was gone. He stopped when there were no longer 3 people arrayed in front of him, intending to do him harm. He stopped when Timothy hit the ground. He didn't stand over Timothy. He stepped away into the alleyway. The police came and he surrendered. Your job is a difficult one. In the moment that John stood there on the street, nowhere else to go, arrayed with 3 people in front of him that he knows mean to do him harm and are capable of it. He believes they're capable of it because it's been communicated to him. They're professionals. They're willing to throw a punch. They're willing to throw a sucker punch. They're willing to pursue him up the street that all of you walked. That's not a short distance. That's not one building over to the next one. John tried to walk away. He was going towards his car. Timothy Pouliot, Mike Mendoza, and Trenton Nash followed him. There is no other definition of what they did. And while they're marching up the street, wagging their fingers, pointing at John and his friends, waving them off. So you may hear that people say, oh, they were talking back and forth. They were being combative. They were being combative as they were walking away. They were being combative as they were trying to get back to their car. while they're being followed. John had to believe that he needed to use force to defend himself, lethal force to defend himself, that he was at risk of serious bodily injury or death. A professional MMA fighter had expressed to him in no uncertain terms that he wanted to knock him out before the end of the night. And he had help. And they know that John is armed. In the moment, if you think that you're going to be knocked out, you have a gun and they know it, what happens next? In the moment, what do you think is going to happen next? His life was in danger. The judge is going to define for you what that is: serious bodily injury or death.
And guys, that right there, I mean, there it is. That's the self-defense claim. And the state has to, the state has to overcome that, because that is a very valid point. The point is, these guys knew he had a gun. They're pursuing him knowing he has a gun. They're attempting to assault him knowing he has a gun. What are they planning to do when he hits the ground? I mean, these guys have continued to pursue and assault him all night long. They've had opportunities themselves to leave the situation. And it appears Timothy Pouliot saying, you know what, I don't care. I'm out to hurt this guy. I'm out to beat this guy up and, take his gun and shoot him with it. I mean, that's what it looks like, at least to me. So if that is what is happening here, I mean, there it is. So this is why I believe you're going to have a very spirited debate in that jury room over this, that I think it could land with completely not guilty. I mean, that's not beyond the realm. But I do believe there's going to be some people in there that's going to go, well, wait a minute here. I don't think that him pulling that gun out in the first place. But listen, they knew he had a gun. That's the significant part here that you've got to separate from. He had pulled that gun out previously, right? He didn't discharge it then. He pulls it out, tells him, get the hell back. The next person that touches me or tries to harm me, they're going to get shot. Like, I'm tired of this is going too far. You got a weapon, I got a weapon. Let's separate. And he starts heading up the sidewalk. And what do? Right? Any reasonable person would have left that scene, right? If it's me and I see a guy with a gun, I'm getting in the car going the other way. No, not these guys. They pursue him up the street, challenging him to shoot them. At a very minimum, in my opinion, providing provocation, making the provocation case. That at a very minimum, they were provoking him to shoot him. And then he comes up and pops him in the face, which at that point, what's the intent of Timothy Pouliot when he's hitting the guy in the face? Is he trying to disarm him and take the gun and then shoot him? I mean, what's going to happen? And then say, hey, this guy attacked me, pulled a gun out, even though you pursued him up the street. Imagine if he hits him and gets pepper spray, they pull the gun out of him, and this guy ends up shot. Where does the argument go if it's reversed now? If John Delee is dead, Timothy Pouliot's sitting in the defense chair, because he would have ended up there in this case. Because his actions, he's running this man down. What are you doing? You were up the block. You were away. Why are you pursuing down the block? And that's what the state doesn't want to deal with. And you're going to see in the closing of the state here, we're going to watch that and see what they say. But look, very strong case here to say you're not going to get second degree unaliving, period. That's just, I don't believe that's even on the table, in my opinion. If you've watched this case, if you've watched each of these witnesses testify and understood that Michael Mendoza was brought out on cross. This guy's got a criminal history. This guy's a violent guy. This guy's known for violent confrontation. And clearly, the fact that he, on a whim, turns around and just pops the guy in the face in the bar, gets into a bar brawl, tells you this guy's not up to anything good. Now, let's listen to the rest of the defense.
Every step that every person on that street took towards the Soho in pursuit of John Delee was a choice. Everything that they communicated with their body language and the things that they said was a choice. And it started in that bar when Timothy Pouliot told Mike Mendoza to throw that punch. And it's tragic it ended the way that it did. But it is not murder. It was self-defense. And in that moment, when he's going to get struck in the head for the second time, he has no choice. He has to act. He has to defend himself. I submit to you that when you watch these videos, when you listen to what people have said, when you decide what everybody's intent was, it will be clear. It will be clear that John acted in self-defense and that his acts were reasonable based upon everything that had been communicated to him that evening. It is tragic, but it is not murder. Thank you.
All right, so the state is next. So let's just take a second here, have a little discussion here in regards to the defense's closing. I think they made a strong case. Again, what we're going to look for, you know, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more on the burden of proof of the state, because the state has to prove, you know, they have the burden of proving that this was in fact a second degree unaliving. And I felt like that was glossed over. Now, the fact that they're putting self-defense up, yes, there's a burden on the defendant as well when you're making a self-defense case to look at. You know, there is a burden there as well. They have to prove there's a burden for provocation, which they put witnesses on. They didn't have to put the defendant on. And I believe, look, finally, defense attorneys making good decisions here, because I believe if he would have had to testify, I think it would have been a potentially much different, you know, a much more difficult case to prove. But anyways, let's jump in here and start listening to the state.
Come get your boy. He's bleeding out. That's the extent of the remorse that he had. There was no fear. There was no terror, and there was absolutely no reason for the defendant to be in fear. He was bigger, he was madder, and he had a loaded Glock stuffed down his pants. This case is about the defendant's anger, the evolution of anger. You watched the videos. You saw it. You'll be able to see it. I agree with the defense on little. And we're going to talk about some of the things you've been told. But I agree, you should look at the body language. You should watch the reactions. You should watch how they're talking, how they're moving, how they're communicating. Because when you see that, what you're going to see is that this man was a bully. He was a tough guy picking on the little guy. That's who he was. Timmy had been pushed around. Yeah, he went up there and he wanted to fight. He wasn't afraid of the bully. And frankly, that just pissed the bully off that much more. This isn't self-defense. This isn't necessity. This isn't from fear. This is anger. This is absolutely retribution. This right here, the fatal shots to the back as he fell to the ground and bounced off the cold pavement. This is an execution. Absolutely nothing less. We talked about this in voir dire. Necessity is required. Actual and reasonable fear of the threat of imminent deadly force. That's not this. This is not that. You heard in this moment what this was. Mr. Saldana, and we are going to talk about his credibility issues. But what we do know is that he was trying everything he could to get the defendant to stop, to calm down, to walk away, to leave, because this wasn't necessary. Before we go any further, we need to talk about where we're actually at with this case. Not theories, not stories, not movie plot lines about people tactically maneuvering and everything else we heard at the beginning of this case. We need to talk about the facts and the law. We start this case, when you walk back in the jury room, we start this case at this point. The defendant pulled out a gun and he shot Timothy to death. That's not up for debate. The defendant knowingly caused the death of Timothy Pouliot. How do we know that he did it? You saw it. How do we know? Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that if at near point blank, you pull out a gun and you dump 8 bullets into them, into their back as they fall to the ground, it's probably going to cause their death. That's the starting point. Nothing less. You're going to be instructed to consider manslaughter, provocation manslaughter, recklessness. We'll talk about the law, but you know what recklessness is. You know what reckless driving is. This wasn't reckless. This isn't reckless. Boom, 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 boom. Continuing all the way to the ground. That's murder. That is knowingly causing his death. But John was in fear. Absolute fear. At least that's what we've heard. When was that exactly? When did we get any evidence that he was in fear? Did you see any videos that he was in fear? Let's talk about the points a little bit where maybe you would have seen fear. There wasn't fear at the bar. Remember? He looked over, he saw Abby. And why would there be? A foot taller, 200 pounds bigger. 200 pounds. And actually, it's more than that. You heard the stipulation. 350 pounds. 230 pounds. More than an average person, an average male in size on him. He towered over him. Feel free to watch this interaction too. I encourage you. And also watch the interaction when the defendant's ex-girlfriend pushes Timmy on the way out of the bar. Because what you'll notice is Timmy's reaction to both. I don't know what he said. It's your job to look at his body language. But yeah, Timmy brushed off the scum comment. He moved along. And another reason, and we already talked about this, the defendant was there with his friends. You saw Gage walk up behind the defendant when he confronted him at the bar. He had his buddies backing him up.
Now let's talk about that for a minute, what this prosecutor's saying. So he's saying essentially that the mere fact that he pulled out the gun and shot him should override any of the events that were leading up. Any of the events of the people that were involved in this, who continued to pursue this man after he leaves the bar. They come up and attack him. This is where the facts get a little inconvenient for the prosecutor. They want you to believe that this was an execution please. This was not an execution. An execution would have happened in that bar. If he was looking to murder somebody or unalive somebody, it happens in that bar.
But this is old reliable. This is the buddy that will never let you down. One squeeze, what was it, 6 pounds? 6 pounds of pressure. That's the difference between life and death. He had no problem pulling that out and using it. I lost count, frankly, of how many times you heard pro fighter. You've heard it a lot. Pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter, pro fighter. Okay. This is what the defendant did with that information. Where was the fear of the pro fighter? Where is there evidence of fear of the pro fighter? Because what you saw, and again, I encourage you, just like the defense attorney, go back and watch the video. Watch what happens when Abby comes back and tells the defendant. Watch the laughter. Watch them laugh. And of course they're laughing. I think Brian Delaney summed it up perfectly, didn't he? Remember what he said? Little dog barking at the big dog. Watch their reactions. But watch the defendant. Watch where he looks after that. Watch where he stares. Even amid conversation as they're having fun. Watch where he's looking. He's looking up here. Because this guy, this little scum, he dared to tell the defendant's ex-girlfriend that he thought he could hit him, knock him out.
Or he's been told that they're going to be assaulting him. So he's looking in his direction to be like, what the heck, dude? You know, I would be watching somebody in a bar and saying, now I understand the size difference, but remember, it was a group of them were saying, or Timmy was saying, we're gonna beat him up by the end of the night. So are your eyes going to be down the bar looking at somebody trying to figure out what's their next move? And he walks up and says, hey, listen, man, no need for a group effort. Let's go outside and settle this. And Timmy doesn't want to go outside then, right? But the thing John isn't doing is he's not brandishing his weapon. He's not pulling a weapon out. That never happens until a weapon is pulled on him, that being the pepper spray. And unfortunately, obviously, the jury's got to decide. What do you think? But why does he pull that weapon out at that moment when the pepper spray comes out? Clearly, he's in fear at that moment. So whether he's in fear in the bar or not isn't the issue. But when you get out in the street and you've got pepper spray being pulled, you've got 3 guys pursuing you, you've got all of these interactions, you've got all these things said, you have to look at that from the state of mind of him at that moment. That is going to come at a very minimum to the provocation issue. Was there enough provocation? Was there provocation in this instance enough to downgrade this to manslaughter from second-degree unaliving? I believe, without a doubt, yes. Now, the only debate is self-defense. And that is something that I am torn on. I wouldn't be upset if a jury, but if I was sitting on this jury, I would say, you know what? I don't know that I could come to say self-defense specifically. I'd have to talk it over and look it over and really give some deeper considerations. And I will give deeper considerations where I find myself as I'm deliberating this case in my mind, at least. But, you know, getting 11 other people's perspective is always helpful. Watching, talking, where this jury comes to and says, okay, this is where I'm at this moment. But I think there's a case to be made. To me, if they come back with a total guilty in this case, I will be stunned. I just don't see it. But put in the comments what you think if you're watching this. As you're watching this, what do you think? Having watched that video, having heard the closings, if you've watched my openings, go back and take a run through some of these witnesses and listen to what they say. Watch the videos. It's very interesting. But let's get back to the closing.
Who the hell does he think he is? I'll show him what's up. So he went up to the bar. Let's go, pro fighter. Let's go outside. Wait a minute. How fearful are you of someone if you're going to ask them to go outside? Pretty scared of that pro fighter, wasn't he? Let's go outside, buddy. Because what does he know? You have 200 pounds, a gun, and some buddies behind him. And when Timmy says no, he pushes him. I'm not telling you that that's the crime of the century, but make no mistake, counsel just told you that the first physical thing, he skipped over this. This is the first assault. This is the first physical aggression. This is that evolution of anger that we see. All right? It starts with walking up. You don't talk to my girl. Who are you, scum? Or you're going to tell my girl that you think you can take me? Hell no. Watch that video, and we'll see a short clip of it. We're seeing it. We're seeing that anger, the deep-seated anger. We've heard a lot about the punch heard around the world. And we're going to talk more about that punch, the claims you were told on Tuesday that you would see about that punch. But there is absolutely, unequivocally, no doubt that the defendant wasn't scared after the punch. We know that. You heard it. And I know sometimes it probably sounded monotonous because you heard us asking anyone that was up there, did he ever say he was scared? Did he ever say he was in fear? Did he ever ask for help? Did he ever say that anyone wanted to fight him? No, he didn't. He wasn't in fear after this. He was mad. You heard what he screamed.
And this is where I take umbrage with this prosecutor on to say that after the punch he was mad. Of course, he was upset. He's upset. He's wanting to understand who hit him. So he's mad, but he's also like trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. And then when they get out in the street and he's getting confronted by somebody else or by some person that he's not sure, are you the one that hit me or not? It gets physical again. But what he doesn't do is pull a gun out and start shooting in the street. So and to me, that's second degree unaliving. You can't make the case that he's just executing people in the street, because he didn't just start executing people in the street. He had that gun on him at that moment when he exits the bar, when he gets into another physical altercation. But the gun doesn't come out until a weapon is brought out by the other parties. And why is Timmy going up the street? Why does he go up the street and come back? What's he doing up there? Nobody answered that question. I did not hear anyone say why Timmy went up the street. I assume his car was parked up there. But Michael Mendoza says, hey, he's there he's got two other people in the bar that he was intending to drive back to the first bar that they were at. What's Pouliot doing? I mean, why is he leaving and heading up the street? Well, none of that was explained. But this prosecutor, it's not making sense. It doesn't. This execution story does not make sense. It does not make sense with the facts of what this jury saw. I just cannot imagine it lands. But let's continue to listen.
He's swearing. He's challenging. He's demanding. What are we seeing? The next tick of anger. It's that evolution. It's spinning up. He's becoming more angry. More angry, not fearful. What fear? And we know he wasn't afraid outside, don't we? Because what does he do when he goes outside? You've had to listen to a lot of curse words and inappropriate language. But that's because those are the words he chose. You heard Mr. Enright testify. Where you at, pussy bitch? And you can hear it. You can hear it on the recording. Then it's out here. What's up? Who punched me? What's up? Who punched me? Where you at? Screaming. Fear? What fear? What fear? And Mr. Nash, all 130 pounds of Mr. Nash that we heard, you all get to judge Mr. Nash's credibility. You all got to see him walk into this courtroom. And you have heard the claims about this interaction. But we saw the interaction, okay? You saw what happened when Mr. Nash walked up there. Mr. Nash doesn't push him, doesn't touch him. No, we don't know what was said. We have testimony about what was said. But what we can see with our own eyes, unequivocally, defense counsel may characterize it as a push or a punch. Ladies and gentlemen, That is a punch. Mr. Nash told you about that punch, and it was a second punch. But that actually gives us some pause, and we'll talk a little bit about this. So now we have the first assault, the defendant. We have the second assault, the defendant. We have the third assault from the defendant. 2 punches. No death. No serious bodily injury. Outweighed Mr. Nash by 200 pounds. No death. No serious bodily injury. Because it's a punch, ladies and gentlemen. And there was no fear of that punch, of Mr. Nash, of any of it. Just like there was no fear of the pepper spray that you've heard all about. It is lawful, and you will see this in the jury instructions. It is lawful to use non-deadly force to stop non-deadly force. What does that mean? That means somebody is using non-deadly force, like punching somebody. It is lawful to use a less lethal, non-deadly force, like pepper spray to stop. Okay? That's what Mr. Mendoza did. He didn't even spray him. He walked up and told him to stop. And if you're wondering, well, what was his other motive? If he wanted to incapacitate the defendant with this pepper spray, here's his time. It's here. It's before the defendant has a gun. Mr. Mendoza doesn't know about the defendant's buddy, Mr. Glock. He doesn't know about that yet. He's going to disable and take this guy out. It's right here. But Mr. Mendoza doesn't do that. And the defendant has absolutely no fear. No fear, and you know that. You heard the walked up the street. Is this walking or is this being shoved? Mr. Saldano explained that to you, that they had to push him up the street because he's trying to get back to Mendoza. He's not afraid of that pepper spray, and why would he? He's got the equalizer. He's not afraid of pepper spray. He keeps John the whole way up the street. That's not fear.
All right, so let's also add a little bit of reason into this, right? If he's got the equalizer in his hand and he wants to just gun people down, why didn't he just start firing when the pepper spray came out? Why isn't he firing on his way up the street? Why isn't he already shooting? Why does he wait until he gets punched in the face to discharge his firearm? So this entire argument that the state is making right now really makes no sense in terms of the facts of the case. And it's inconvenient to them, of course, because they want this to be, you know, looking like it's a cold-blooded situation where he just guns somebody down for retribution and vengeance. But why didn't he do that before? If that's what his intent is. If his intent is to just kill someone, why hasn't he already done it on his way up the street? Why was his friend able to move him up the street? And the answer to that is because he didn't want to kill anyone at that particular moment. He was afraid, but he's a big guy. He's got a girl there. He doesn't want to look afraid. He's dealing with, and again, this is where it would have been helpful for the defense to put on. There was a witness in a case that I covered a few weeks ago. It was dealing with the sentencing of a young man for whether or not he should get life imprisonment for unaliving a teacher. But it was talking about it, and in this case, it's very relevant, even though this is like a 30-year-old dude, talking about the mentality of young men, talking about the group mentality when young men find themselves in a group and how they don't do things, they don't reason well, and they don't certainly will showing fear or fear of looking like a quote unquote pussy, as this prosecutor talked about, causes you to get into situations and do things that are against your own self-interest. Because in that moment, in that vacuum of the moment, he's not going to demonstrate the fear like you would think, because he doesn't want to show that, right? But there are indications of fear. The mere pulling of that gun okay, shows fear, right? And the fact he didn't discharge the gun right away shows fear. If he was having a murderous intent when the pepper spray comes out, if this guy wants to kill somebody, he's pulling that gun out and he's unloading it right there on those guys saying, hey, they had pepper spray. They're coming at me.
That's anger. Watch the video. If you have questions about what happened in this time frame when the defendant walked down that alley, watch the video. Hold them up full size and watch it. Watch where everyone else is. All the way across the street. They broke off. They went the other way. There was no fear in Soho. This isn't fear. This isn't the face of fear. This is the face of a tough guy looking for a fight. But now it's amped up. We're seeing it again, right? This is anger, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't fear. And Mr. Saldana admitted the defendant ends up going around him. And you'll see the video of Mr. Saldana pointing for him to get out in the alley. Again, we'll talk about Mr. Saldana's credibility issues, about the whole he told him to stop. A little confusing since, 30, 20 seconds after Mr. Delee stops, Mr. Saldana was pointing for him like this to get down the alley. I think we know what really happened during this interaction because we have it on video. But what we definitely don't see is fear. Anger, absolutely. Fear, none. Anger did this. It wasn't fear that made the defendant target Timmy and Timmy alone. You've been led to believe that the defendant feared Mr. Mendoza because he had rings on and because he had pepper spray. Every single bullet, 8 out of 9 bullets, hit Timmy. The smallest guy in the group, but the guy that had talked to his girlfriend, the guy that said he could knock him out, and the guy that stood up to him and punched him. Not condoning it, neither should you. But he shot Timmy out of anger, not because he feared him. Watch the video. We explained to you folks how, Detective Lovejoy explained to you folks how to use that VLC player and how you can go frame by frame. If you have a question about what the defendant was doing, take your time with it. But what you won't see is any deviation from Timmy. He followed him all the way down. Execution style, not self-defense style. He wasn't springing around saying, get back. It's like this. That's how it happened. Because it wasn't about fear.
And that's why in the end, again, what you're hearing right now, if this was a case arguing manslaughter and saying, hey, this isn't self-defense, he was provoked, there was provocation, there's this fight in the bar, I think it's a 20-minute deliberation. I mean, potentially, maybe not 20 minutes, but I think it's a shorter deliberation, right? Because I think that the state can really emphatically get into the nuts and bolts of this and say, look at this. And they could have fine-tuned their witnesses. But because they were focusing on trying to go after the whole enchilada, the big one, right? To lock him up for life, it took away from their ability to really put on the case they needed to put on in this case. And I understand their concept. Maybe their thought is, hey, we overcharge this, try to go after the big one, and then the jury falls back. But what if the jury bypasses this because you didn't spend enough time, because you're trying to argue provocation didn't occur? So you're not getting your version of events, and you're arguing a version of events where they just flat out say, no, that doesn't make any sense. But I believe, listen, self-defense, this is why I said self-defense is tough. If it was one shot, he falls to the ground, and this dude walks down the alleyway. But the 9 shots, and again, you've seen that video. We started off this presentation today watching that video together. You saw that video. You saw what occurred. Does that look like self-defense to you? Does that look like self-defense? And that's the first question that has to get answered. If the jury says no, that wasn't self-defense, then the second layer, which I think is going to be the layer that is the one that's going to maybe be up for debate. Maybe it won't be up for as much debate as I think, because I believe then you look at everything else and you say, without a doubt, listen, self-defense, I find it hard to believe for self-defense, although you might find somebody in that room who says, yeah, they had rings on their hands, they had pepper spray. If he falls to the ground, this young man knows what's going to happen if he hits the ground. Why are they pursuing him down the alleyway? What was their intent? And that's all. Hey, look, those are all questions that, again, that's the problem I have when you say this is execution style, like this man says, because, hey, they're pursuing him. They could have gone the other direction. They know he has a gun. He showed them a gun. They're taking their jackets off. They're letting him know we're advancing on you. And now he's in this situation where he's supposed to be the big tough guy. Yeah, he's the big bully tough guy. He's the guy that we all hate, right? Guys like him, I don't like, right? I don't like people who try to use their physical size to intimidate people. But in this moment, he's bitten off more than he can chew. He's got 3 guys pursuing him. He knows they're fighters. He knows so at least someone in the group has already physically assaulted him once. They're not scared. They don't appear to be scared of the gun. They're letting them know, dude, we're coming at you and we're going to kick your ass. Like we told the girl in the bar, now we got you. And now he's forced to discharge that firearm, because he knows if he gets his ass kicked and they get a hold of his gun and he's already displayed his gun, he's kind of in a pickle. He could get killed. Not to mention he's going to get seriously hurt or injured, at least at a very minimum. And these guys aren't going away. And yeah, he's going down that aisle and they're talking. And the thing you don't know is whether or not, he's saying pointing down the aisle, but or down the alley, when you look at it, he was also a guy who talks with his hands. He testified to this. So they're saying, no, it looks like he's saying, get down there. Listen, if he would just start moving them. He moved them all the way up the street up there. He moved them away from the pepper spray incident. I think that he's saying, listen, these guys are coming after us. It's out of control. And the thing is, if you look at the moment, the first video, we're going to watch back the videos after we get done with closings. And you're going to see how fast all of this happened and occurred. We're going to watch a couple of videos, and then that's how we're going to end this thing. And I'm going to ask you guys to put in the comments, what do you think this outcome will be? What do you think this verdict will be based on what you've seen? I would challenge you to go back and watch this. This is absolutely what the process of justice is about. This is why we have a trial, right? Because of cases like this. And I think it's been fair. I think both sides have done a good job. I've watched some of the comments and some of the coverage I've been watching, and some people are saying they think the state was incompetent to defend. No, I think they've both done a great job. I mean, what else would you ask for in this case? But I think the only thing is the state may have made a mistake here. If this turns out to be completely not guilty, then my analysis, my post-trial analysis on this case will be the state made a mistake in overcharging. If he ends up convicted of everything, if he gets the whole enchilada here, well, then I stand corrected. I don't believe that's going to happen, but we will see. This is going to be very interesting. I will be on pins and needles waiting for this verdict when it comes out. Let's jump back in here, guys.
Now, frankly, that should be the end of this closing. That should be the end of me talking, and you should have this case. But there's been some misstatements. There's been some mischaracterizations, and we need to correct some of that. We need to talk through some of that. The defendant didn't need to call any witness. That was his right. But he did call witnesses. So you need to judge what you've heard and seen just as critically as you would the state. Let's start with Mr. Enright. Mr. Enright was a bystander. He didn't know anyone. We agree. He didn't have a dog in a fight. He was courteous. He was polite. He answered questions. He swore to tell the truth. But what we saw was Mr. Enright was not accurate on details that we know, on details that you don't have to speculate about. And we talked about this in voir dire, right? The difference between lying and just getting something wrong. All right, and we all agree that there's a difference. Sometimes getting things wrong just happens. We all saw this, right? Mr. Enright explained that they came out of the goat, and there was a large group following him, harassing him. Some girls were spitting at him, swinging at him. And Mr. Enright said that after that happened, and after the defendant pulled up the gun, that the group ran straight across to the south, straight across to right here. And that's where they stayed. If you remember, I asked them, did they go up the street? No. Did they go down the street? No. They went straight across to where you marked the X. Yes. Okay. And that's where you heard them make that statement? Yes. Okay. So what we know, now I want you to think about the time. In this time frame, we have lots of people yelling about guns, right? We have Abby, the defendant's ex-girlfriend, screaming at the defendant to put the gun down. Remember, this is when the gun's out. This is after the pepper spray incident. Abby is screaming, put the gun away, put the gun away. Mr. Mendoza's running up the street, screaming, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. Did Mr. Enright confuse something? Maybe. But if somebody said that, and it was over here, it wasn't Mr. Mendoza, it wasn't Mr. Nash, and it wasn't Mr. Pouliot. And also, how does that help you? How does that help us figure out what was going on in the defendant's mind at that time frame? There is absolutely no evidence that the defendant heard that statement. None. There's not even evidence that anyone near the defendant heard that. Mr. Saldano certainly didn't hear that. No one else heard that. So you're being asked to decide this case based on speculation that it was said, speculation on who said it, speculation on who heard it, speculation on how that affected them, speculation on why that would cause him to shoot him 8 times. That's not how we decide cases. That is not how we judge someone's guilt or innocence. There is absolutely no evidence that that played a role in any of this. But what is corroborated about what Mr. Enright said? What do we know is corroborated? We know that this was back and forth. Mr. Enright doesn't have a dog in this fight. He doesn't know Timmy. He doesn't know Mr. Nash. He doesn't know Mr. Mendoza. He doesn't know the defendant. He doesn't know his friends. But we know it was back and forth, and he said it was. No one was trying to back down. No one was trying to leave. No one was trying to ask for help. It was a back and forth. Defense in the opening tried to lead you to believe that this was a coordinated attack and the defendant was just scared. Is that what you saw? Is that what anyone described happening? No. So let's talk about a couple other things that you've been asked to believe. You've been asked to believe that Abigail Elliott Ward was a hero. That she was trying to stop Timmy from running up the street. Really? We have the video. That's not a question. Miss Elliott Orr ran up the street and pushed him. And sorry, I don't mean the first time she shouldered him in the bar and then dressed him down, yelling at him. I mean this time on the street when she broke free of her friends and sprinted all the way up there and pushed him as physically hard as she could. That's what I mean, that time. The evidence is a little bit different than what you've been told. Mr. Saldano. Mr. Saldano came in this building and he told you some things. You heard some inconsistencies, and I'm not going to go through each one of them. but we have to at least talk about why you should give his testimony very little weight. If he said something and it's not on video, you should be very suspicious about it. We obviously know about his inherent bias. Friends from middle school, typical stuff. This is his buddy. This is the guy, they're tight. Now, we again talked about the difference between lying and making a mistake. Lie, lied, lying are very, very, very sharp words. Mr. Del Soldano, though, took this stand as a liar. He lied to the police. And that may not sound like a big deal, but let's put this in perspective. Mr. Soldano, according to him, is terrified. More terrified than he's ever been. So scared that he ran into Soho Bistro. Ran in. Now, remember what he was afraid of. He is afraid that these three scary men are going to do something to John. And he is terrified. So he runs into Soho. But while Timmy is lying in his pool of blood on that cold pavement, Mr. Soldano is in Soho lying to the police about what he saw and what he heard. And the reason he was lying was because this was his buddy. He knew what happened out there. He knew how mad the defendant was. He had just tried to get him to leave. He lied to the police because he didn't want to jam him up. Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Nash were in the thick of it. You've been led to believe that they're the boogeymen. They spoke to police. They stayed. Mr. Soldano, I didn't see anything. No, didn't hear anything. Really? You didn't see anything that you thought might be relevant to a murder investigation? You're going to stand there and lie to a uniformed police officer who's investigating the murder of a man who's bleeding out in the street in that very moment? And I'm not going to go through, frankly, every single inconsistency. But there is certainly one that stood out. I told John to stop. You told John to stop. The day after, the morning after he has lied to police, he sits down with the defendant's investigator and he tells her things. Details, super important, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Left that out of the report, didn't he? Then you heard he testified under oath before. On this issue, he was handed that very report, and he was asked, is this accurate? Is this complete? Is there anything you need to add? Is there anything you want to add? Anything you forgot? Nope, that's fully accurate. He was handed a business card so that he had an opportunity, if he remembered something differently, to call. But then he comes in here and tells you, John, stop because I told him to stop. Does this look like telling John to stop? This is seconds after the defendant turns around that Soho. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, I can't remember right now. You're more than welcome to watch it. Mr. Soldano didn't tell the defendant to stop. He was telling the defendant to go, which is what he was doing the entire time. And don't forget, Mr. Soldano did admit no one followed them down that alley. He admitted that when he apparently told them to stop, that Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Nash were across the street. How much sense does that make? You have to ask yourself, is there any reason to believe that Mr. Soldano didn't come up here and lie to your faces just like he did to that police officer that night? Again, if he told you something and it's not corroborated by video, you may want to look at the video. And let's talk about another claim you've heard. We have heard a lot about the punch. A lot. In the opening, you were told direct punch. That first punch, direct punch, caused the injury. That's what you heard. That's what you've heard this whole trial. He Direct punch, direct contact. Okay, let's watch. There's Mr. Mendoza. Ooh, let's watch it again. And again. Now notice something about what side of the face he's swinging towards and what side of his body that punch goes to. Goes to the opposite side of where that cut is. But John's face hits this when he pulls Mendoza to the ground in the fight. Now, why do I tell you this? Why does it matter that there was a strike, swing and a miss? It matters because we don't mischaracterize. You need to judge this case based on the facts and the law. And the fact is that Mr. Mendoza missed. It doesn't matter. The state concedes. He went over there.
Well, here's the thing, though. The cell phone video shows he got hit. Who punched me? So some sort of contact was made. Now maybe it was on the ground, or maybe it was a graze, or maybe his head did bounce off the rail. But the bottom line is when he gets up at that moment, at the most accurate moment, he's saying, "Who punched me? Who punched me? Somebody punched me." So this is not a mischaracterization. It's the moment in a purest form when you see the defendant stating that at that moment before any shots are fired, before anything has advanced to the degree that it did. And that's his perspective. So the defense isn't wrong for pursuing that. Now, maybe he didn't hit him initially, but like Mendoza said, there was punches exchanged when they were on the ground that the camera did not pick up. So this, again, does nothing in terms of proving that what happens later is or isn't self-defense or is or isn't provoked. I mean, what it does show is that these guys are willing to attack him. So it goes to his mindset. He's sitting there. Again, they're rekindling this. He's over there off to the side. These guys could have left it alone and went on to the strip club like they were planning to do and had a night of their life. And this thing would have died and been done. But instead, they decided to go get in a fight. They decided to pursue a fight with him, and then it ends up where it did.
Looking for a fight with Mr. Delee, and he got one. And Mr. Delee was kicked out. It doesn't change any of the events that happen after. But what it must change for you is think about the bill of goods you've been sold, what you've been told. You were told direct contact, direct punch. Mr. Mendoza's ringed up hand took him out. I think the quote was darn near knocked him out. And then he had this fear of those rings. Remember? You kept hearing about the rings. What evidence is there that that the defendant knew about the rings? How did that affect his state of mind? It couldn't have because he didn't connect. Again, and we talked about this very briefly, the claim that Trenton Nash walked right up and, quote, gut in the defendant's face, gut in John's face. That's what you were told, gut in his face, was continuing the attack. That's what you were told. So let's see. There's Mr. Nash walking up, smoking a cigarette. It's Mr. Nash getting directly in his face, continuing the attack, right? Only after he was punched by a guy 6'6", 300.
What I don't see, well, what I did see there is Mr. Nash advancing and not walking away. I didn't see a punch get thrown right away. I saw words being exchanged, to which we're not sure what they are. And then I see Mr. Nash again, inexplicably continuing to advance, continuing to inflame the situation to the point that this guy throws a punch. Now, he's already been assaulted and attacked inside the bar. He doesn't know if this is the guy who did it. So, we don't know what the words were that was exchanged specifically, although I think Mr. Nash said, again, wasn't very specific himself. And we didn't hear from Mr. Delee. And the witnesses around weren't sure what was said. It was just trash talk. But it results in a physical altercation that we see right there. So the issue is he's not backing off. He's coming forward. Just like these guys follow him back up the street and then come across with pepper spray and start ganging up on him. Remember, Timothy Pouliot's up here. So this argument doesn't hold water of what he's trying to say here, of John just being the aggressor. No, John's over here talking smack. These guys, he's over in a car, and he decides to walk across the street. He could have smoked a cigarette up over here. He could have smoked a cigarette up over here. He could have just, said nothing, but he comes over here and starts talking trash, continuing the situation. At a very minimum, adding to the provocation that eventually results in the discharge of a firearm that results in the death of Timothy Pouliot, which is why I believe that's where this case lands. But you could also say this adds to the fear of that moment. Let's keep listening.
He didn't so much as raise a hand. Didn't push him. Didn't hit him. Didn't kick him. Nothing. Now, it's your job to judge credibility, character, all of that. It's not mine. You saw Trenton Nash come in here and testify. You heard his demeanor. You heard how he talks. You got a kind of feel for how he thinks about life and how he carries himself. Mr. Nash wasn't a threat to the defendant, and the defendant knew it. You heard a lot of questions about, did the defendant just tell you to go? And you heard that in the opening, right? The defendant told him to go away. Just go away, sir. I don't want anything to do with you. Okay, well, let's check the video. This is Mr. Nash coming over. Easily confused. I'll smash that fucking face. A little bit different than just go away. Get away. Get out of here. No. It's a little bit different because this is what actually happened.
But what he doesn't say is, I'll kill you. I'll shoot you. I'll fire a gun at you. Because at this point, his mindset isn't about killing. So, again, a missed opportunity by the defense to take that moment that they want to avoid and instead embrace it and say, no, this is about his mindset. Is he in a fight or is he in a gunfight? Because at that moment, no weapons have come out. So he doesn't have an intent to go kill anyone at this point. He's talking about fighting him. He's talking about smashing his face with his fists. He's letting him know, you hit me already. He's not talking about killing. And he's letting this dude, he doesn't know if this is the guy that hit him or not. So therefore, that doesn't prove murderous intent. That doesn't prove that he's this deranged psychopath going around wanting to just kill people in cold blood. No. This shows his mentality. He's been drinking. He's at a bar. He wants to fight. He wants to get in a fist fight. It is not till moments later when a weapon emerges that he pulls his weapon and says, wait a minute, we're pulling weapons out? Well, I got a bigger weapon than you do. If you think you're going to disable me with that and then beat on me, you got another thing coming. I got a gun and you pull that out. You start coming at me now physically, I now have a right to shoot you. And there is the line that the defense, I thought they did an okay job, but I think they missed an opportunity here by embracing that moment right there and making this argument to say, listen, the intent of this guy is all in the video. This is organic video. He's in a fist fight. He's in a fight with his hands. Who advances it to a fight with weapons? It's not him. Therefore, you can't say that he wants to kill people because he hasn't tried to kill anyone. He hasn't tried to bring weapons out. He had that weapon in his pocket at that moment. And while he brings it out later and brandishes it in the alleyway, and if you saw my opening statements covered, I felt like that showed some intent. But the question is, he's pulling it out. And is he looking? We can't see what he's looking at. But if he's seeing these guys, having heard the testimony and heard what's going on and knowing that the pepper spray, he's pulling it out as if to show them, like, y'all keep coming. Someone's getting shot. I get hit in the face again. Someone's getting shot. You come at me. You've pulled out a weapon. You've attacked me. Someone's getting shot. And again, it would have been much better if the attorney would have been talking about this and letting, in that sense, and pulling it in to say, John Delee is all about, hey, we're getting a fist fight. We're duking it out. He's confident he'll beat him up. But then when you pull weapons out in a fist fight, John Delee's not the first one that did it, which is kind of what my impression was when I first was looking at this case. And then we heard the evidence. So again, I'm moving a little bit closer to the self-defense now as I'm listening to this, as this prosecutor is helping me get there. Because that's a significant fact, and hopefully a juror picks up on that. Because that is peering directly into John Delee's mindset, in his psyche, of what he's doing at that moment. Let's watch some more.
Just like you heard, I think we just heard that the defendant was out of road. That's what we heard at the moment of Soho. The defendant was out of road. You went out there. You saw it. Out of road? Out of which road? He could have walked behind him 20 feet and gotten to the busiest road in New Hampshire. He could have walked into Soho. Because remember what Mr. Soldano said he did when he was in fear, ran into Soho.
Now see, the prosecutor's doing too much here, right? Because he's trying to address all of these things that the defense has raised. When reality of the situation is, again, this is where it comes down to, by them trying to prove the big charge, right? And not being able to have that discussion with the jury and say, this is why it's not self-defense. There's provocation here, and he discharges the firearm. And yeah, he could have done X, he could have done Y, he could have done Z. You lose that opportunity to say, wait a minute, he got provoked. He's in a fist fight mode. Weapons come out, but he overdid it. He shot the guy. He shot the wrong guy. And therefore, manslaughter for him. Manslaughter for killing the wrong guy. That guy didn't have pepper spray, right? That guy comes over and pops him in the face and pop, 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 pop. And again, that's still going to get left with that jury. It's still the mountain they got to climb, the defense, that is, to get to a not guilty. But this guy isn't helping his case at all, because what he's showing is, if you're a juror and they're going, have you never been in a situation like this? Like, who the hell's thinking about the interstate? Or any of this? He's in a very tunnel vision moment. You're in a very tunnel vision moment when you're in that moment. Add the alcohol, add the situation, the totality of these circumstances. And again, what many people forget is it only has to line up once. And since the outcome is what it is, it's potential that is how things lined up, and they ended up where they ended up, with a man dead in the street, multiple gunshots, and another guy standing there, and this whole thing having erupted and escalated to a point that it shouldn't have. Let's keep watching.
Well, fancy that. A business is open, and if you're fearful, you can walk in there for safety. Something that just didn't happen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on going through the series of events, but given the back and forth, I'm going to spend a couple minutes just going through what happened, what the evidence actually shows happened, and then we'll talk about the law. Oh, my apologies. I forgot about some of the other claims that you heard. The planned attack, the tactical maneuvers, the lookouts, the hiding. That's what you were told on Tuesday. How much of that did you see? How much planning and coordination happened? And when did that happen? When did Timmy, 007 Timmy, have time to coordinate this attack? And what tactical plan did he devise where instead of taking Mr. Delee and spraying him when he's punching Mr. Nash, did he think it was a good idea to wait until he had brandished a gun and walked up to him in the middle of the street? There is a difference between what is factual and a characterization. And I encourage you to follow the facts and the law. This is where it started. This is what started it that night. The defendant up here and Timmy talking with his friends. If you watch the video, you'll actually see Mr. Delee come up here first, talk to a couple of the friends, and then he comes down. He walks up. This is where it's beginning. This is the moment where he's telling Abby, what are you doing talking to these scum? You know what happens here. This is where that tough talking Mr. Mendoza and Timmy are talking tough to the girls they've been hitting on all night. The ones that they were just embarrassed in front of, called scum. And they say, I'm a pro fighter, I'll knock him off. That's what they said. And Abby went and told the defendant. I already said this. If you're interested in the actual reactions to that, watch the video. You know what actually happens. This is what happens. The challenge to fight. Remember this? The big dog showing the little dog who's boss, pushing him down the bar like he's a sheet of paper. And then we know what happens. Mr. Mendoza comes down. I'm not going to go through that video again. You saw the swing. You saw the scuffle.
And there you have it, guys. That's what I was just saying earlier. Who punched me in the face? Where's the mischaracterization? The defense said that because he's saying that right at that moment. There's been no shooting. There's been nothing that he needs to cover up. He's talking about what just happened. Who punched me in the face? He got punched in the face. Whether that first punch made contact or not, he got hit in the face. Because he's saying that. He's telling you that. He's telling the jury that. He's telling everyone that now listens to that video that happened. And when he's leaving now, remember, it's only minutes later that this whole thing happened. So this is all in a vacuum. What you're watching, when you're watching this and considering this, it's all in a vacuum. For him, it's all happening. It's just happening on top of each other. And building up and building up and building up. Let's keep watching.
You were told during closing that the moment before this, when the defendant had pushed Timmy and walked down to the bottom of the ramp, how happy John was. How he was just dancing and having a good time. Right? That's what you were told. Yeah, of course he was. He did the typical bully thing. He had just walked up, flaunted his size, flaunted his strength, put this little scum in his place and slid him down the bar. And watch who's watching when he's doing that. And you will see Abby looking up there, watching, going like this. Ooh, stuff like this. He was happy because he just played Mr. Tough Guy. You know what happens here? We showed you. He comes out of the bar. He goes up the street. You heard Olivia describing the anger that everyone was trying to calm him down, but John wasn't having it. He wanted to finish this fight. Who dared to hit John Delee? Who dared to do that in front of his girl? Think about how mad he was that Timmy was talking to his girl. How mad he was when Timmy simply...
So the state's making the case now, right? What are they saying? He wants to finish a fight. He doesn't have his gun out at this moment. He's not trying. He didn't pull the gun out in the bar. He's not firing it aimlessly in the street and gunning people down at this particular moment. The gun never comes out until a weapon comes out.
Said something to his girl. You're going to punch John Delee in front of Abby? And not get away with it? And he wasn't calming down for anyone. You know what happens here. You know the pepper spray comes out. You know the defendant's tone and demeanor. You heard characterizations of it, but this is what was actually taking place. You also heard a lot of discussion about where everyone went, and it's all captured. I know it's not great quality, but from the parking garage that captures from the far right to the far left, you can watch all the movements. You can watch that and then the Soho video, and you can figure out where everybody is. But this is where everyone goes. The red line is John and his friends. The blue line is Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Nash. And whether you like Mr. Mendoza, whether you think he's a bad guy, it happened just like that. That's what happened. You can watch it on the video. That's where the people went. No one was following them down the alleyway. He could have kept going. What was it? They were going to their home, the safety of their car, right up here. On his way. The other guys are going the other way.
The fact that he's going to make this argument when Mr. Mendoza's car is parked over here, he has no reason. Mendoza and Nash have no reason to be up here. Pouliot has less reason to be coming up here. The only two that belong up here would be Saldana and Delee because they're going to their car, which is over here. This prosecutor is trying to argue that they weren't following him. Oh, they didn't try to follow. They're following him up here. There's a confrontation right here. Why are they here when their car's down here? They saw the gun down here. They've walked all the way up here. It's undeniable. This is where the case comes and says, okay, maybe you fall apart on self-defense, but the provocation issue, with all that's happened, and they pursued him up to here, I believe the provocation issue, again, I think this jury comes back with manslaughter.
But instead, you saw this. You saw this happen. You saw the defendant turn around. You saw him throwing his hands. You saw him pulling that gun out and hollering over to those people. Apparently in so much fear. He was so scared of these three guys, he thought it would be a good idea to be challenging them to come over. And as Mr. Saldana was telling him to leave, no, I'm going to these guys. There is a gap between these two cameras. Call it the arena. He was going into that arena. They were out there. He was stepping into the arena because he wanted to fight, not because he was scared. There's no evidence of that. And what follows this? What follows the defendant entering into that arena after he has demanded to fight? After he has pushed people and hit people and used derogatory names, swore at people, had to be pushed up in the street? What followed that is this. Dude, these guys are awesome. Hey, get back here, back here. Think about just how ready he was to use that gun. Now, you know he had pulled it out a couple times. How he had racked that gun. You can watch him on the Soho clip pulling out that gun. Think about how ready he was to use that gun to be able to pull it out that quickly, target Timmy, and put bullets in him all the way to the ground. To the point the detectives told you, and you saw bullets ricocheting off the pavement. That's intentional, ladies and gentlemen. That is anger. That is not fear. This wasn't a spray and pray. Get back. It wasn't any of that. It's this, all the way to the ground. Execution. It's a question about his state of mind. The question about what was going on. You heard witnesses describe his state of mind. And defense is right. You did get a glimpse into that in that minute or so after the police got there. You heard what happened, and maybe you didn't pick up on it. So let's think and let's listen about how the defendant is describing his state of mind in this moment. Three fucking Manchester fucking scrubs, dude. You stood in that spot. You stood in that exact spot in the view. And asked you to turn around, to look around. He is standing 15 feet from Timmy's dead or dying body. His body filling up with blood because bullets that he shot ripped through his organs and his heart. And he is standing there calling him a Manchester fucking scrub. A lot of fear, isn't there? No anger, just fear. He was terrified. That is not fear. That's the bully. That's the anger. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how.
It also could be, too, right? From his perspective, Manchester scrubs, these are thugs, scrubs, whatever you want to call them, right? Who are attacking me, who know no better. They've come and attacked me and tried to cause me harm, and I had to put 3 bullets. Man, why did these guys not go away? What's their mentality? They're scrubs. They're street thugs. They're scum. They're jerks. They're not good people. And they're coming after me. I had 3 guys coming after me from Manchester. Scrubs. Guys willing to do violence. Violent individuals, Mr. Prosecutor. Let's keep listening.
You know, when you go back there, that he knew what he was doing and that he caused the death of Timothy Pouliot. There is a lot of charges for you to consider. This is what the defendant did. But we've got to talk about the law on fear, because you have been told John feared for his life. Okay. Let's start first with what's not self-defense. You can't use deadly force against the threat of non-deadly force. You can't kill somebody who is using non-deadly force against you. Excuse me. Street justice, and we talked about this in voir dire, just because somebody punches you, just as somebody pisses you off, just because they wronged you, doesn't mean you get to execute them. In retribution, those Manchester fucking scrubs, that's not self-defense. Deadly force is defined as this. Any assault that someone commits with the purpose of causing or which he knows to create not just death or serious bodily injury, substantial risk. So not just a chance that it could do it, not just a one-off, a substantial risk. Now you may be wondering, well, how do we know that that's not a risk? Did Trenton Nash come in here and testify? Was he still walking, talking, breathing? Did you hear any evidence about any serious bodily injury? This man, who you saw stand up when witnesses went to identify him, towered over everyone, punched scrawny Trenton Nash in the face, not once, but twice. No serious bodily injury, no death, because that's not deadly force. That's a fight. Again, Mr. Mendoza has a different idea. He's from different background, from the street. For him, a fight is a fight. All right? That's what this was. That's not deadly force. Fear. We've talked about this. It's not just fear. It's actual. It's an actual belief that you are faced with the imminent use of deadly force. The deadly force is right about to come upon you. You have to actually believe it, and it has to be reasonable. We already talked extensively. There was no actual fear. The defendant wasn't afraid of anything. And if he was afraid of anything, it wasn't reasonable. But again, we don't get here because we know there was no fear here. Excessive. This is common sense. We all know this. We agree. Use your common sense. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't use excessive force in self-defense. Only a reasonable amount of force. All right? This case, what happened here? In this case, excessiveness was the difference between life and death. You heard the medical examiner describe that for you. If the defendant had stopped shooting, if when Timmy goes like this and starts falling to the ground, that was the end. That's when the threat was over. So even if you believe he was justified in pulling that trigger, they can't use excessive force, and you own every bullet that comes out of that gun. There was.
And this is where it's going to get problematic for the defense because of the 9 shots. And that's where at the beginning of this case, I thought it was a problem, a big problem. And I still think it's going to be a big problem for the self-defense. Now, when it comes to why did he fire initially? Provocation, right?
There's no more threat, and he kept going, and he kept going. And as Timmy fell to the ground, he kept going, and he kept going, right to the point where Timmy's body bounced off the pavement as he tried to get away. And what do we know from Dr. Weinberg? That those shots, those ones to Timmy's back as he fell away, that's what killed him. He would have survived this one. He would have survived this one. He would have survived this one. But when you watch the video, take a look at what way Timmy falls. You'll see this, and you'll see this, and you'll see him fall. All of them while he was falling. And it did happen quick. It happened quick, though, because the defendant made it happen. He chose that. That's his choice. He's responsible for those choices. He's responsible for going like this and tracking Timmy as he fell to the ground and continuing to shoot until he took all of the life out of him. That is not justified.
And that's the strongest argument the state has, I think, right there. The fact that he shot all those shots. Now, the question, though, becomes, was he provoked? Was there provocation? Now, 9 shots, that's a problem. I think, that's why I'm saying there's going to be jurors in that room that are going to say, no, there's no way I can let this guy off, walk out of here with 9 shots fired. And then there's going to be the people that say, well, these guys had pepper spray. They had weapons. He believed, and again, being a semi-automatic weapon, he didn't have to chamber bullets or anything like that. He just starts pulling, and the police gets into it. And when you hear that, it was not like he stopped. It wasn't like there was two shots. He pauses, 2 more. He pauses. No, it was all one fire. And I have a feeling. Well, I don't have a feeling. I know this is the first time this guy's firing his weapon in this way. It just happens, right? So The 9 shots is persuasive to a degree, but I don't believe it's completely persuasive because it was all part of one act, right? Which is why, again, I feel like this case lands on manslaughter. But let's keep watching.
Now, you didn't hear anything during closing about provocation, but you're going to see you're being asked to consider provocation manslaughter. To be clear, the defendant did not act under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance, and he was not under extreme mental or emotional disturbance which caused extreme provocation. That's important. This is extreme. You're being asked to consider whether 5'7", 121-pound Timmy's single punch to the defendant, who was armed with a gun and outweighed him by over 200 pounds, caused such a reaction that it overwhelmed the defendant to the point that he could not consciously think about anything, that he couldn't understand what was going on, and it was purely a reaction without any thought, process, or any ability to react any other way. Another way to look at this is part of that instruction is going to tell you that not only would you have that, but that a reasonable person would have that. You all went through the jury selection process. You were all picked because you are reasonable, everyday people. You would have to believe that if you were in that same situation, you would have no ability to control yourself, that you would have such a rush, surge, emotion, and you'll see in the instruction, not just anger and not just hatred. This is beyond. This is
And what's happening here is one important distinction, and the judge is going to make this distinction in a moment as they when they come out of sidebar, and that is it's while you can't put yourself. Well, here we go. Let's listen to the judge.
Not to put yourself in either Mr. Pouliot's position or Mr. Delee's position. Your job is to review this case objectively, looking at the evidence dispassionately. So disregard the prosecutors.
Yeah, that was incorrect. In fact, he
put yourself in that position
well,
and guess or think about what you would have done.
Could come dangerously close to getting a mistrial with saying things like that.
Consider the evidence in this case.
a reasonable person. So a reasonable person in that same situation would have had to been overtaken by such extreme emotion, beyond anger, beyond basic hatred, emotion that is uncontrollable. A reasonable person, not just him, but a reasonable person would have to react the same way. You heard the defendant's reaction. You heard that minute after he killed. You heard his first statements to the police. There was nothing about, I saw red, I didn't know what I was doing. There was nothing about, I don't know what happened. I was just overwhelmed. There was nothing about that, ladies and gentlemen. It was, you punched me in the face, I was defending myself, they threatened to kill me, and Manchester fucking screws. That's what you heard. There's absolutely no evidence that the defendant was extremely provoked to the level that a reasonable person wouldn't have been able to control themselves.
Dude, these guys are awesome.
Hey, get back here, back here. That's not self-defense. That is second-degree murder, and that is reckless conduct. If you go back to that jury box, and you're wondering about reckless conduct, listen to the audio from 54 over minutes. Listen to the bullets whizzing down the street as people are walking across the street. That is reckless conduct, and it is second-degree murder. You've sat in a trial where you've been able to see what happened before, during, and after a murder. And as everything played out that night, you saw people's reactions, you saw their body language and their emotions. You saw the defendant's actions and his emotions. At the beginning of the trial, Attorney Harrington told you that you would see the defendant's anger, that you would see someone looking for a fight, and you did. That you would see someone with countless other options before having to resort to shooting Timothy 8 times, and you did. And she told you what you wouldn't see. You wouldn't see from the defendant at any point any fear. No fear of Timmy, no fear of Timmy's friends, no actual fear at any time throughout the night, because there was no reason for fear. And just like Attorney Harrington said, there was no actual and there was no reasonable fear. Timmy and his friends were unarmed. The defendant towered over Timmy. You know how much bigger he was. Timmy's punch was not deadly force, and he knew it. That's why he kept trying to fight him any chance he got. That's why this continued going back and forth. You saw the evolution of his anger, his rage, the jealousy, the bullying, the tough guy showing the little guy what was up. This was a bar fight. The defendant had a lot of choices that night. He could have walked away. He could have gone into Soho. He could have gone up the street. He could have punched him. He could have pushed him. He could have tripped him. He could have yelled out for help. He could have done a lot of things before he pulled out a gun and shot Timothy to death. He made 9 choices that night in that split second. All the way.
Didn't he, though? Did he not make those choices? Did he not call out for help? He was evicted. This was something the prosecutor is missing the point here in glossing over the fact that he left that bar. He's yelling out on the street, "Who hit me?" He's upset. He didn't bring the fight to anyone. He didn't go across the street to the car where the 2 guys were. He didn't run up the street of Timothy Pouliot. He stands there on the street with his people who are trying to settle him down. He's intoxicated. He's upset. He's bleeding. But he isn't brandishing a gun at that moment. He's not throwing a gun around the street. He's not spraying the street with bullets. It's not until the weapon comes out, which is the pepper spray, which, again, many people say, well, it's pepper spray. It's not. But the point is, he didn't draw his weapon first. They draw a weapon first. He's been assaulted inside the bar. He's got 2 guys coming at him. Now, Tim Pouliot's up the street. We don't know what he's doing or why he's up there, except he's looking back down. And next thing you know, they're pursuing him up the street, pursuing him. His friends are moving him up the street in every step until he's leaving. Now, yeah, he's screaming. He's making drunken yelling and screaming and hollering like a drunk does. But these guys are pursuing him, knowing he has a weapon. So this prosecutor making this statement as if he's some crazed, demented person running around wanting to kill somebody, he could have started trying to shoot people when they were pursuing him up the street. He didn't. He doesn't fire the weapon until he gets hit. Now, at a very minimum, you would say that right there, yes, he's under duress. And to me, that's the provocation right there. It's not just Timothy Pouliot coming at him. He's got a guy who he knows has pepper spray. They're pursuing him. You see him in the alleyway. The witnesses have said, hey, next person, if somebody hits me, they're getting shot. Dude's got pepper spray. They're coming at me. I'm not getting my ass kicked. Potentially now they know I have a gun. Therefore, and they're professional fighters who know how to use their fists as weapons.
To the ground. And he is responsible for every squeeze of that trigger, every choice that he made. He chose over and over again to shoot Timothy. Those choices recklessly endangered every bystander on that street that night, every pedestrian, every person in a car. In those choices, shooting unarmed Timothy Pouliot until he was flat on the ground and dead, were the choices of knowingly causing the death of Timothy. And that's why we're asking you to find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder
and for reckless conduct. Thank you.
Okay.
So each is a version of the convention.
All right, so that is the closing arguments. Now, again, I do not believe this is going to be a not guilty verdict. I've been clear on that, but I strongly believe this is appropriately a manslaughter verdict. I think this meets the guidelines of manslaughter. Looking back, let's take one more look back. Okay, give me a moment here. All right, I'm pulling it up here. Let's take a look here. New Hampshire manslaughter. We're going to pull it up one more time and go through it. Now that we've got and let me present here. Stop sharing. Present. All right, so let's go back down through this again. So again, the jury has to find that while under the influence of extreme mental and emotional disturbance caused by extreme provocation, but which would otherwise constitute unaliving, and it's got to have been done recklessly. Let's see here. Oh, you know what? I apologize. Hold on. I've got to switch this up. Give me a moment. All right, here we go. Sorry about that. So, all right. So that's what they got to find. Now, I want you to think about everything you've heard. I want you to think about the video that you saw. I want you to think about the circumstances you've heard the attorneys talk about, the witnesses that were called, the arguments that have been made. And again, think about this from the standpoint of, first of all, does it rise to self-defense? I think that's a hard case to make because he shot the guy 9 times. Although, given the pepper spray, some of the events that occurred in the bar, the fighting that occurred, and the fact that, again, the attorney didn't make this argument, but I'm going to make this argument that when you hear that video from out in the street and he's yelling, I'm going to smash your face. He doesn't say, I'm going to shoot you. He doesn't say, I'm going to kill you. He doesn't say, I'm going to blow you away. He says, I'm going to smash your face. That's moments before the gun gets brandished. That's what his mindset is at that moment. That is telling and important. It's important because it's telling you he's in the mindset of a fist fight. He's in the mindset of a bar fight. Weapons are not on his mind until someone pulls a weapon on him. And when that weapon gets pulled, he goes into, okay, now I'm pulling mine out. And let me see if I can find this here. We're going to go in. I'm going to share the screen here. I'm going to share with you some of the videos that were presented in day 3. Stop sharing. All right. And let's go through this.
Same as the last clip, just a different angle right here.
So this is inside the bar here, and we're going to move through this because this is stuff that's really not, to me, as relevant as what I want to show. I want to move to when they're outside. And I also want to play for you this here. Listen to this tape in its entirety.
See a lot of people heading out this way, and then they'll just roll on for a little bit, and you'll see the NPD response. There'll be multiple cruisers.
And this gives you a good perspective of there's the car. That's Mendoza's car right here. He's parked right here. Okay. All those interactions occur right in here on the other end of this sign. Unfortunately, the sign blocks it. But the important thing is he goes out and he says, well, I couldn't smoke my cigarette. Nash says, I can't smoke a cigarette, so I walk across here. Why couldn't he have just stood in front of the car and smoked the cigarette, right? He's claiming, oh, I had to walk across. It was just because it wasn't safe because I was on a snowbank. No, he could have. Clearly, there's sidewalk up here, at least that I see. He could have walked over. He comes across because he wants to start a fight. And that's important because he's over here talking smack. Pouliot's walked out and up here. What's he doing up here? We don't know. Mendoza's in the car, and this guy comes over to bait him back into a fight, to which Mendoza runs over with pepper spray and pulls a weapon out, indicating, hey, we're gonna spray you with pepper spray and kick your ass. And it's a different story if they beat him to death in the street, or he attempts to pull out his gun in the process of all this and it goes off, right? Now, they didn't know he was armed at that point. They brought the weapon. The pepper spray comes out before that, right? He comes out. He brings the pepper spray. Nash walks over. Now you're going to see all this transpire.
So I'm going to play States 58.
Here we go. Now I want you to listen to this whole thing. You're going to hear the entirety of everything, and you can really capture how quickly all this transpires. I believe that's Mendoza. He's walking over to the car. I believe. We'll see. Yep, I do believe that was Mendoza, I think. Pretty certain. Yep, because he's going to go, okay, he's going to go try to get in the car here, and he tells him, oh, I need to smoke a cigarette. And supposedly he was going to walk back in the bar to go get two other friends they were with. There's the defendant right there. Okay. Now here comes Nash. He's coming around.
White car. Who just got out of the car? It's Trent Nash.
Yep. Now remember, he's over here shouting. So why is Trent Nash coming back over here? Here he comes. Now just keep in mind the timing of how quick all this is. And remember, Mendoza's already out of the car. He's standing over here. There comes Mendoza. See, Mendoza claimed he was in the car. He's not. He's out of the car waiting. Nash comes over. Mendoza's out of the car waiting with the pepper spray to come over. And I think Pouliot's up here. This is what the defense attorneys are saying. It seemed like there was some sort of plan here. They were going to come get him, spray him down with pepper spray. And here comes Tim Pouliot coming up, right? He's coming down. And he's moving down. And remember, he's moved up the street. And there you have it. That was the gunshots. Now, I want you to think about the reason why that's significant is because think about, first of all, bam, 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 bam. There was no stopping, there was no pausing, there was nothing you could say would take away from the moment of the provocation that occurred when he decides to fire the gun. There was no separation. That's the first fact. Second fact, all of that's one continuation of events. So everything he's processing in that drunken mind, not to say the alcohol makes it difference, but I'm saying thinking about how he's processing the entire situation. These guys have moved up. You saw they were at their car. Let's go back here and let's just take a look for a second. Let's go back here to this. Now they're coming out, right? Now, I believe that's Mendoza right there. I believe. I'm not 100% certain. Pretty sure that's Mendoza and Nash, I think. I might be wrong on that. Actually, no, I don't think that is. Oh, no, never mind. We're too far. Hold on. We got to get back a little bit. Okay, here we go. Right there. All right, let's watch the beginning of this. There's a point I'm trying to make here. Because I want you to pay attention up here, what's going on with these guys, right? And you see Pouliot come out and come up this way. Mendoza, there's Mendoza. I believe that's Mendoza and Nash. He takes it. Now, you're going to see this car comes, people get in. And there's activity back here blocked, but you can see he's coming around here. Mendoza, I don't believe Mendoza actually ever gets in the car. He's getting something out of his car, I believe out of the back seat of the car. He's lighting a cigarette up, and they're hatching a plan. Now, he's out here yelling in the street, talking smack. Mendoza's just been in a fight. He wants to continue that fight. But Mendoza is not in his car. Does not. But of course, this car is. Is that Timothy Pouliot? Maybe no.
Detective, looking at that white car, who just got out of the car? It's Trent Nash.
But see, that's Mendoza. No, that's Trent Nash. Okay, so Nash is moving across. Mendoza's still, I believe, back in the car. I'm going to take a look here. I want to see. Okay, never mind. I guess he does get out of the car. I do see the door open. Never mind. I take that back. So now Mendoza's getting out of the car. I did not see this earlier. Okay. So he's out moving across now. Now, what he should be doing is getting out, taking Trenton Nash, and moving him back to the car. But instead, he comes out and threatens the guy with pepper spray, brings a weapon to a fight, and then, of course, continues to follow him down the road. Let's move on to some other video here. This is a different perspective, I guess. Hold on a second here.
This is the last one, correct? Street. Then actually we talked about the curve right here is no longer blocked by that sign. With Mr. Nash behind the vehicle, you'll see one with Mr. Mendoza in front of this vehicle, and Mr. Delee, Chandler, and Saldana.
Now, remember, all of this is occurring in a vacuum. They're leaving. They're confronting him. They're coming across here. He's already over here. They could have let him leave, gone back in and got their friends, gotten the heck out of there, went to the strip club. But no, they come across here and continue the confrontation. This is the point that when the state says, oh, this guy's looking for a fight, he's looking to discharge a firearm. He could, if he was, again, these guys were looking for a fight. It's mutual.
And again, this one won't have audio. This is the last one, correct? This will be just video, yes.
So here we go. And here comes that black car, which got in our way. But we're going to be able to see. We should be able to see. Yes, we're going to be able to see everything that was going on behind here. So here they come. Follow them right here, right? He gets in the car. Is he going to get in the car? I guess. But it looks like. So he comes around. He gets in. All right. So it's indisputable. He gets in. He goes to get in. Now they're coming up this way. The defendant's coming up this way with his group. As we saw, he's yelling, he's screaming, he's upset. Trenton Nash sees this. He knows who that guy is, right? He knows who John Delee is. John Delee doesn't know who hit him, but he knows who he is because he knows who the confrontation was with because he's been standing there with Nash or with Mendoza and Pouliot, right? So he's watching right here. And he makes the decision. This is the moment right here. This is the moment where the provocation occurs, right? This is the moment where we start to make the case that says, all right, self-defense, maybe much, but there could even be a case of self-defense here. But this is the moment where you have to start, hold on there, separating the cases. I apologize here. I guess I'm having some sort of a loading issue. But this is the point where we have to start to separate the case. Okay? Where or not the case, we have to start to separate the actions of the individuals involved. Hold on here. All right, I think we're back. I apologize for any issues that we just had. So let's go back here. So here he comes across. But anyways, I apologize if there's any interruptions. But this is the moment right here where you have to say, okay, you've had the issues in the bar. And again, this is the part that's got to be understood. You have an issue in the bar. The initial issue brought on by John Delee. They shake hands. Pouliot and him shake hands. It could have ended right there. John Delee didn't continue it. He didn't address him again. Pouliot goes to the bar, talks smack about him. Now, Delee, being the type of guy that he is, goes to confront this. It was like, dude, listen, what are you talking smack for? You know, pretty much like you don't scare me. He pushes him, makes it clear, I'm not afraid of you, challenges him to go outside. He backs down. Now, John Deelee's satisfied to say, hey, listen, he's trying to impress this girl, his ex-girlfriend, and she's like, yeah, okay, yeah, you're talking smack. What do you think? Yeah, you're not so tough now. Because this girl, and as the girlfriend didn't testify, but her friends did, they weren't impressed with these guys. They thought they were jerks. They thought they were a little weird. They weren't their type of guys. So Big John, comes back over and he's like, okay, he's satisfied. Pouliot now goes and gets Mendoza involved. Mendoza now goes and confronts him. So now Mendoza confronts him. That's confrontation. Now things have begun again, right? Because Delee goes over and fires back at Pouliot, but doesn't do anything else. He doesn't pull a gun out. He doesn't say, I'm going to shoot you. He doesn't start firing his weapon. He goes over and confronts him like happens many, many times in the bar scene. So then it's done. Now Pouliot goes and gets Mendoza involved. Mendoza then goes and strikes Pouliot. Now they're attacking him again. They're coming at him again. That gets settled. They're thrown out of the bar. And now these guys are still coming at him. So in his mind, I've just been attacked in the bar. I don't know who's attacking me. Now this guy's coming across like, hey, as if, hey, is he the one that hit him? Now watch what happens. Here he comes. He's over here yelling. He comes over here. I guess that's the arm outstretched. Is that? Okay, yeah. So Nash is over here. I think we're a little bit behind because of the streaming issues we had earlier. Let me. All right. So I'm not sure what's going on here with the connection. We're going to try to present again. Let me. Give me a moment here, guys. I do apologize. I'm not certain what's happening here with the internet connection. It appears I have a strong connection, but I don't know. Let's get this back up here. All right, so we're back here. So we're going to try to watch this video again. I'm not certain what is happening here with everything, but it appears we're having some malfunctions here. Let's see here. All right, so now this is the side-by-side of the events. If it'll play through, hopefully it does again. All right. Anyways, it doesn't appear it's going to let me do what I needed to do as far as streaming. So we're going to kind of take it from there. I think you saw a lot of these videos in the closing anyways, and I'll maybe try to come back and do a separate presentation because it seems like I'm having some problems here from what I can see. But point of the matter is this case, in my opinion, comes down to the fact that you've got a set of circumstances that if you do what the state's trying to do and break them down into individual compartmentalized portions, it makes it look worse than it is. Now, I agree 9 shots is excessive. I think self-defense is a tough road to get across. But the provocation, which again, the defense spent a lot of time arguing on self-defense. I understand why they did that, right? That's what they needed to do. And the state is arguing for the whole enchilada. This is a classic case, I believe, that falls right in the middle. The actions of those young men coming after him, he ends up ultimately pulling a gun. They showed no fear of that weapon. They had weapons themselves. Again, were those weapons as powerful as that gun? Obviously not. They weren't as deadly, although they could have been. But you couple those weapons in with the fact they knew he had a gun and they're pursuing him down the alleyway, which is what I was going to show you in those videos. As you start to look at it from that vein, from that perspective, it puts a whole new light on things. So I believe this is going to be a lengthy deliberation. I wouldn't be shocked if we don't have a verdict on Monday if we're waiting till Tuesday. although we could have it all wrapped up by Monday. I believe in the end, though, we walk away with a manslaughter that they, and even the judge was hinting at this. The judge had the ability to not allow them to present provocation or to, and he had to wait to the end. He himself, I think, sees what this is and knows where it should go. Now, what this young man receives as a sentence, he could get up to 30 years if he gets convicted of manslaughter, if he gets convicted of manslaughter. Now, if he gets second degree, he's facing up to life. And again, there is some leeway with the judge. The judge can agree to do something different. I think this is a case where you would depart now from life. I don't think life is necessarily fitting. I would say if he does get himself convicted of manslaughter, I think 20 years is the sweet spot here, because I just think that that's what this warrants. He took a life. He didn't do his part in getting out of the situation. He himself was he had a gun on him, and as a gun owner, as someone who's supposed to be responsible for that weapon, he wasn't responsible. He pulled that weapon, he shot that man, and he should have made a different decision. He was provoked, but I think 20 years. He could even maybe justify 15. I wouldn't say any less than 15. I don't think this is a 3-year deal. I don't think this is a 5-year deal. Man lost his life. You gotta make a statement on that. Firearm was used. It's an unfortunate set of circumstances. But that's where we stand, guys. Put in the comments what you think. I apologize for all the technical difficulties. I'll watch this back and see how it actually turned out. I hope it turned out okay. And I'll probably do another video. That one I'll probably upload where we're going to do some analysis of those cameras, angles, and things that I wanted to do to make the case for why I believe you don't go past. This is not worse than manslaughter. And when you look at everything in the way it needs to be looked at, I think you can get there. You can get there. But anyways, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this today. We've looked at this case. We've analyzed it. My verdict, guilty of manslaughter. Tell me your verdict in the comments. And in the meantime, until we speak again, let justice prevail. And I'll talk to you soon.